Well, hello, brothers from other mothers. And I'm sure there's a couple women out there.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Hopefully a few
Hopefully.
represent.
Well, this is the Science Bro. And today we're going to talk about yields. It's a question that's been getting asked a lot lately. And it's a very complex subject, actually. So we're going to just try and touch on it. And I'm sure in other videos we'll expand on these concepts and get deeper into the individual components. But for the sake of today, we just wanted to go over some of the main core components of what it takes to get good yields in living soil systems. I think first and foremost, the most important aspect of maintaining yields in any system is that what you're choosing as cultivation activities and the components of your cultivation environment are cohesive components that fit together. It's really common for people to come from other areas of cannabis cultivation, like hydroponics or really any of the hydroponic techniques, and then they move into living soil. And it's really common to take aspects that were advantageous, beneficial, or downright essential in other hydroponic activities, and then they try to work them into living soil, and that makes it quite problematic. You know, some of the most problematic techniques that do not transfer at all come from hydroponics. Like one Sarah and I were talking about today over lunch was putting hydrogen peroxide into the soil. So in order for something to be true, the content needs to match the context. So in the context of drain to waste coco coir, yeah, H2O2 your ass off. It's a really good fit in that system and provides a benefit. There's free oxygen. It does a light sterilization of the soil, maybe cleans up the roots a little bit. In pure coco coir cultivation, yeah, fantastic, have at it. But in a soil-based system, that is one of the most catastrophic things you can do, hands down. Yeah. Hands down, one of the most catastrophic things you can do.
Yeah. And it's something that's been also proliferated in, I don't want to say living soil, but maybe in some more mainstream regenerative type of environments where that could possibly be a good thing. But I would just say that if you're putting hydrogen peroxide in your soil, then, you know, for the purposes of increasing oxygen per se, then you're missing out on one of the key microbes that should be there, and that is your fungal component. Mm-hmm. If you're having to add something like hydrogen peroxide because you think that that's how you're going to get more oxygen in the soil, I would say, you know, look again, maybe consider, you know, getting these fungal components into your soil and helping them to proliferate by feeding them and doing practices that support them. Mm-hmm. So that's what we would like to see instead.
Yeah, there's a comment about actually infiltrating air through an air pump. And if you're going to commit to living soil systems, you should get the fungi into the system, which what they do is produce oxygen and allow pore space. Yep. So in hydroponic cultivation, you can pull the plant up and look at the roots. In living soil, we can't do that. Yeah. And so we use the microscope to determine oxygen concentrations based on what organisms are awake and active and alive. Which maybe is a good time to make a couple announcements. It is that time again for our Crescent Method Basic Training Masterclass. So we're wrapped up with the first round of master classes for our training, which is essentially what we do with our clients. So Sarah has taken the one-on-one consulting that we do with our clients in an intimate situation, and we've turned it into a group learning setting, which is actually going well. I think it's working really well for everybody. So we got a couple spots left. We start on May 20th. That's a Friday?
Yep, next Friday.
Yep. So we start next Friday, and classes will be at
3 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time.
I guess it's daylight, MDT now. We're still kind of getting used to the, whatnot. But anyways, you can jump to our website. I'll put a link in the comments. And essentially, we're going to be taking farms through the entire process that we do with our consulting clients. We're going to be helping with soil chemistry, helping with microscope analysis, designing and determining feeds that are appropriate for the context based on your water test, and putting together a cohesive system of success that's very in-depth. And, you know, in the most humble way possible, we've had some pretty remarkable results, hands down. I mean,
Even with experienced growers that have been hucking themselves at living soil for a long time, trying to get success and haven't had success, we find that this program really does kick it into high gear for them. So
It does,
it starts to bring it all together as to why maybe some things hadn't been working before and why now they are. So,
Yeah.
and that a big crucial component to that is making sure that we actually have the full soil food web there and present, like the fungi in the soil.
Like the fungi,
Yeah,
exactly.
we need that oxygen component. We need all their
Exactly.
metabolites. We need them cycling nutrients and getting those nutrients to the plants. We need all the parts and pieces there.
So the important part is, what we would define as beneficial soil fungi, which gets a lot of people up in arms, but nonetheless, when we follow the rubric that Dr. Lane described and put certain characteristic or organisms with certain characteristics into a category and define that as beneficial, it works.
Yes.
But nonetheless, following that rubric and using the microscope methods defined by Dr. Lane Ingham, beneficially fungal dominant, yes, produces tremendous results. And so
No hydrogen peroxide needed.
no hydrogen peroxide, none.
Not unless something went terribly wrong.
No.
And then.
And when you do that, we've seen that's usually, in our consulting work, a lot of times a farmer calls with a problem. And a lot of my job is backing them into the actual cause. So when you work backwards through what has happened, it usually starts out with, well, somebody was suggested that I throw hydrogen peroxide into the soil. And down the road is root aphids or russet mites or complete disaster. So making sure that the components that you are implementing into your cultivation space are actually conducive and beneficial to a living soil system is of the utmost importance in order to get the highest yields or the peak potential out of that garden. Which I guess brings us to our second point, which I still stand by as one of the most important aspects of this entire thing, is the biological component. And so the way that we determine what aspects of cultivation are beneficial and what are detrimental is simply by quantifying with the microscope.
Yeah.
And that's literally what we've done our entire career as professional consultants. In the beginning, we would come to a facility, we would do a barrage of microscope tests or analysis or bioassay, however you want to term it, and we would just kind of dissect that facility a little bit. And typically patterns emerge, and the biology is always off when something's wrong.
Well, they certainly always tell a story, that's for sure.
Yeah. And so you have to, it is of the utmost importance to get that biological component in line. And for you as the end user, trying to navigate your life based on what you have access to, like these videos and different Instagram accounts and things like that. And we found that most of the information is really nowhere near in line with what Dr. Lane is actually teaching as far as what's beneficial for plant growth. And that turns a lot of panties into a tight knot, but that's just the world that we see and what we continue to see, and seems to be one of the most consistent things possible. So, for example, if you do not have high enough predators in the system, so something that eats bacteria, you're not going to have a release of nutrients available to the plants. If the populations of what eats bacteria is not high enough, along with a high enough bacteria, that conversion and delivery of nutrients is not going to be adequate to maintain or exceed hydroponic expectations. And that's hands down the number one thing that's lacking in pretty much everybody's garden. And that continues to be the trend. It is getting better. In 2016, 2015, when we started doing this, industry-wide, everybody was at the bottom. We're now starting to see farms move up, and we're starting to see the community at wide have better and better biological populations in the soil. So yeah, protozoa, exactly. So protozoa eat bacteria. Their poop turns into terps and yield, essentially.
Medicine.
In medicine.
With whatever plant you're growing, that's going to turn into medicine. All of this microbial interaction will give you the highest medicinal compounds from any plant, whether it be vegetables or cannabis. And we need that desperately now. So
just quick bullet points are, in order to have good yields in living soil, you need to have a thriving it needs to actually be living, and you need to be at certain targets. You need to have the delivery of nutrients equal to the demand on growth. So in hydroponics, where you're providing a soluble, readily available nutrient, often in a calculated quantifiable amount, there's a tremendous growth response. In almost all of the living soil techniques, that's the part that's completely missing, is this availability and delivery of nutrients at the speed with which the demand on growth is requiring.
Yeah. And I think that there's just some trends that we don't want to let go of, as far as, we've always held this bat and we swung this bat, and I've been able to hit it this far with this bat, and it's really hard to let go of that bat and swing a different bat when you've never done that before. And so I think that there's just going to be some things that don't translate well when you start looking at microbes, when you start getting them, if you're not looking at them yourself, or you start getting them analyzed. There's just going to be some things that just aren't going to translate well in your transition to, or maybe you're already been doing it and there's still some things that aren't translating well.
And the only way that you figure these things out is if you track these biological populations over some period of time. And that's what we do with our consulting work. We do it every couple weeks. What's kind of interesting is in the earlier years of us consulting, we did the most amount of biological analysis because people were just trying to figure out what it was and how it could help them. And so we did extremely high volumes of biological assessment of cannabis cultivation properties, literally millions of square feet. And as we get further in, it's interesting how the farmer's mindset changes, and to a certain degree, it's almost harder to get farmers to do this type of assessment the longer we get into it. Whereas the first people that we worked with really just went wild. They said, show me what you can do. So we would go into a facility, we would do a shitload of microscope assessment, and we'd paint this magical picture. What we find is a minimal functional minimum is every couple weeks. So if you are able to track the biological system in a specific cultivation space every 2 weeks, you will learn most of what you need to know about that biological system. The farms that we work with that have fantastic results follow at least that protocol. The farmers that we've had the best results with go beyond that protocol. The farmers that we work with that struggle to really meet their peak potential often have a hard time following through with the every 2 week sampling. And so we're always going to put that as number one. I think the biological aspect is by far the most misunderstood thing of this farming practice. A lot of the information is very misleading, and from a textbook scientific standpoint, I would define as incorrect, which is leading people down paths that's not actually leading to a living soil. It's leading to a disease-dominant, problematic soil that has living things in it, I guess you could say. I don't know. Do you have any other comments you want to add on to that, Sarah, as far as managing the biological system of a living soil system?
Well, I think I touched on it either last week or the week prior, but, whenever you're learning something new and you want to get good at it, right, use the microbes to train you into telling you the story of what it is you're doing above ground, whether that's helping them or hurting them. And you have to keep in mind, and I know that this audience does, but they're your team. They're the ones doing a whole lot of legwork for you and will make your life easy. In comparison, you won't have to do nearly as honestly, when people get their biology on point, they don't have to spray IPM. They don't have to do knockbacks. They don't have to do these things because the plant is getting what it needs when it needs it. It's getting the nutrients that it needs when it needs it. That's how important it is. So if you want clean, high potency, best, it's just, I can't tell you how important it is. You have to just find out for yourself and do it, and I guess I'm just a huge advocate for these microbes because we need them in the system. We need them. We need their interactions with these plants and what they can produce medicinally in our system as a top level predator. So, it's just a retraining of learning how to work with the microbes, learning how to let them show you, and whatever it is that you're doing above ground, whether that's hurting them or not. Maybe there's something that you're doing that you would think is completely benign, and it's turning out not to be. And I guess it does take a little bit of humility, especially when you're been doing this for so long, to let a tiny little single-celled organism tell you that you're doing something that's hurting them, Right. But when you do, when you can get there and when you can listen, magical things can happen, I tell you what.
Yeah, for the first 2.5, almost 3 years of our consulting, we only provided biological assessment. And when we came to farms and added this biological component, at minimum, there was a 30 to 40% increase in all categories. Yield went up, quality went up, potency went up. There was typically like a 30% reduction in the calendar. So a lot of farms were able to reduce a week of vegetative time, which they never believed us. And then almost every farm in the first 2 years grew the plants into the lights because it threw their calendar off. Yeah. The power of actually doing the soil food web to a way that your plant is looking for is unmatched, in my opinion. And here's a question about cover crop. Would you say that the choice of cover crop affects soil biology?
Well, it's certainly, the research is showing that it definitely does affect them, whether on my end of things, because I'm just reading an ecological profile. I'm not speciating or anything like that. We're just reading an ecological profile. It absolutely does help in the health of the profile of the stability of the organisms in the system to be able to get the foods resources that they need, the organic matter and all that stuff. So it absolutely does help as far as ecological stability of organisms in the soil. As far as species goes, there's some pretty cool research on that. There's a YouTube video about a German research going on with the different levels of species, so 8 species versus 10 species versus 12. And I know that they're doing some really cool research over there on that. So yes, it does absolutely
Gabe Brown's done some interesting research on what crops provide what. So you're seeing differences in organic matter improvement and different characteristics of soil improvement on a large acre scale, which I think it can be helpful. What we see in our work is the complete absence of a mulch layer and the complete absence of a cover crop definitely hinders output. Oftentimes when we're converting a cocoa grower or a hydroponic grower, we can't just throw them right into the Amazon. It's too much change too fast. So often we'll start without a mulch layer, without a cover crop, then we'll add a mulch layer, then we'll add a cover crop. And you kind of have to slowly build the complexity of the system. But if you take somebody who's doing living soil and just bare dirt and you translate that to somebody that's got it really figured out, that's using a mulch layer and a cover crop, there's typically a 10 to 20% yield increase just in that alone. No questions asked. Because of how it allows the biology to continue working more hours of the day. So the way that you meet the yield and the growth rates of, say, an undercurrent system or a flood table, you have to provide adequate moisture and protection from dormancy, really, of those organisms to get them producing around the clock, Yeah.
Well, and not only that, but different plants have different metabolites and different sugars and different needs, and so they'll be feeding more diversity and keeping that diversity of the organisms there, which you need. Nature really likes redundancy, so they'll have several species that do a single job of sequestering sulfur or whatever. So
just putting a single EM1 is not it at all.
Yeah. That would be something living, but it certainly wouldn't give you the breadth and depth of what millions of species of organisms would do.
It's a bicycle with one pedal, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So what would you recommend to build the soil biology in a new bed?
So many things.
So many things, but on a simple 3 bullet point list. First of all, you have to inoculate with something. Yep. You have to have a compost source that inoculates. This idea that it just magically shows up and develops on its own, we haven't seen one single instance that proves that that's even remotely true.
Not even in native systems when people are putting on manures in the fall. So everything that you do is a food resource for your microbes, and it's a food resource specifically for somebody. And usually it's either a bacterial food like manure is, or it's a fungal food. And so you don't typically get both with the food resources, and a lot of things that people are doing tend to just feed the bacteria and not necessarily the fungal components. So yeah, the highest tech we have is our compost, is our microbes. They do the heavy lifting for us, and all we do is literally help them with their intelligence. You know, they hold all the keys, they hold all the intelligence, and we just don't mess it up. We put them in there, we make sure they have enough food resources and nutrients to keep going and keep building, and we just try not to mess that up. And they have all the intelligence,
So you need to inoculate with actual soil food web. You need to have a hospitable environment, so maintaining adequate moisture in the soil surface. Having a cover crop and the extra roots does help protect the organisms and increase their proliferation. It's been a long day of talking and Zoom calls. But and then you need to support that system. So spraying IPM, flooding, letting the soil dry out. So then you need to maintain the conditions ideal for high biological populations.
So maybe, this whole drain to waste or to water, to runoff, that's not something that we ever do or even strive to do or even remotely do in living soil systems at all. So, and if you're working with salts or anything like that, that's totally different. In that context, that's probably appropriate, but not in living soil.
What up? First time listener?
Nice.
Was it long time
Welcome.
listener, first time caller? All right.
Yeah.
So I guess that brings us to our second component, which is mineral chemistry.
Yes.
We have noticed, I think Dr. Elaine has been watching the show, and she's now starting to embrace it and advocate. So I'm glad to see that we've likely had an influence on her. She's had a tremendous influence on us. So it's good to see her coming around and promoting mineral chemistry. In all the farms that we've worked with, in all the cases that we've helped, we had one farm where there was hydroponic growers that knew nothing, but they were extremely open vessels, and they did exactly what we said to a T in that first harvest. Interestingly enough, the soil that I produced for them was the first time that I hit exactly the numbers I was aiming for on a brand new soil. So we had this crossroads of the best soil chemistry in a soil that I had made to that date, and a very open and malleable cultivation crew. And in the first 6 weeks, we got to well over 1,000 micrograms of fungi and well over 1,000 micrograms of bacteria on the old scale. So that would be like 350 or something. No, I guess it would be
like 450.
Be like 450 on the new scale. But nonetheless, hit the targets of biological populations to meet or exceed the growth rates of hydroponics. And there's no way you're going to talk me out of mineral chemistry being an important part of biological systems, because we do see that there is a component of it. You still can get high biological populations with dysfunctional soil chemistry, and we do that all the time. But the problem is, if soil chemistry is dysfunctional and you add biologically complete compost, you're going to accelerate the usage of that mineral that's already dysfunctional, and you're going to exacerbate those dysfunctions. You will make it better. You will definitely make it better. And like I said, in our first few years of consulting, we didn't do anything but biological treatments, assessment, and adjustment, and we always got at least 30% more. But if you really want to hit the peak potential, you have got to manage soil chemistry. And I would even take that far enough to say that there's a more advantageous strategy to managing soil chemistry, which is what we're covering in our soil balancing masterclass. So we're getting pretty close to wrapping up the first soil balancing masterclass. We've got our last class on this Sunday, and then we'll be starting the new class on June 2nd. So there's a couple spots left open for that. If you're interested in that, go to our website, click on the link, and we will direct you to the promised land. And it is extremely important to manage, maintain, and balance soil chemistry. if you only add microbes, you're going to accelerate what's there. If what's there is dysfunctional, you're going to deplete the lowest minerals faster, and you're going to have great increases in plant growth. You're going to have an acceleration in plant growth. You're going to have an increase in plant health, but the bottom of that barrel is going to come quicker. And that's what we learned in the first few years of only doing biological treatments. When we first started consulting, we really wanted to help build a cooperative world. We wanted to work together with people. We wanted to support other businesses in the industry. And relying on other people for mineral balancing turned out to not be a good strategy for our business. So it became a mechanism of survival for me to figure these things out and apply them and understand the principles. And it is extremely difficult to come to figure this shit out. And
Well, and I think we have a different,
You
I
know.
guess, benchmark for success. Not that everybody isn't trying their best and
Sure.
wants highest whatever, yields and potency and all that. I guess we're all kind of striving for that, but for us, it's all about, this life vitality. What is the highest life vitality, highest potency? What is the highest possible health we could get from, whatever it is that we're putting together that we think is a good idea, So when you started out doing this mineral balancing, we weren't, something just wasn't jiving. And so I know that you had to really hit the books and figure out, what is going on, what makes sense, especially when we want to work with these microbes, when we know we're going to be keeping them as our benchmark. I know we definitely had to figure that out. So.
yeah, and it was tough. I mean, the best book is The Ideal Soil, but it's still incomplete for the purposes of really managing potting soils. There's Soil Balancing by Bill McKibben, which I think is helpful. I think just his writing style is kind of trash. No disrespect. I'm glad he wrote a book, but some of these agricultural people, it's impossible to follow their stories. So I had a hard time with that book. I'm better with textbooks. There's other books, there's some, I'm looking here because right here, Mainline Farming, that's supposed to be on mineral chemistry, it's marginally helpful. Science and Agriculture is lightly helpful. The Albrecht books are super interesting, but they don't tell you how to do it. They give you the targets, the why, the research. And so coming up with how to do the math, it was very difficult. I feel that I'm very good at math and I like that type of thing. It still took me 2 weeks of only doing that. Literally I shut down and stepped away from our business for 2 complete work weeks to get through the books and the math and figure out the computations and build a spreadsheet. But for the first 6 months, I did not have a comfortable grasp on it, and it was very uncomfortable as a consultant providing professional advice. It took me about a year and a half to feel very confident with everyone that I did because I had seen enough start to finishes. And so it is really difficult to come into contact with good information. You are starting to see more people provide mineral chemistry advice, and that is improving the community, and I think that's great. I still do believe that in order to really hit the best yields in living soil, you have got to manage the Malic 3 test, which is the total nutrient pool of that soil, and it determines the characteristics. Somewhere in here there was a comment about that. I'm trying to find it, but somewhere in here somebody had a comment about the micro and major elements determining everything about soil chemistry, and that is true, and that's what we find. So in order to allow adequate pore space for the biology to do their work, you need to have appropriate calcium and magnesium ratios. So calcium has a pushing away force, magnesium has a pulling in force. Every single dry top dress amendment strategy, whether you buy it from the store or order it from an online retailer, will put you into a position where calcium is extremely dysfunctionally low, magnesium is extremely dysfunctionally high. That creates a tight, compact soil that is lacking in oxygen, and that's where the problems start to happen. You can still do fairly decent on managing the solubility in that soil, so the saturated paste test. And the saturated paste test, I think, is important if you're disregarding biology because you have to manage solubility. In our experience, when we come behind those advisors on those projects, the yields are not what we would expect to see. So you can see an improvement by managing the saturated paste test, but the yields don't, in my opinion, come anywhere near what Nick Tomasini's getting or what we get. And Nick and I take a similar strategy towards mineral balancing. We're managing The Malic 3 test for total nutrient pool and balance of that soil and consistency of the soils in that facility, paramount. You have got to do that. Never going to convince me otherwise that you don't need to do that.
Too much success with it.
Too much success with it. And with managing just the saturated paste test, you are missing the variability in that soil. If you take a soil blender that is putting a certain mineral package into their soil, and for whatever reason you get a batch of soil that didn't get any minerals, and then you get one that has double the minerals because the employees did it after a smoke break, the saturated paste test will look very similar on those two tests. When you do the Malic 3 test, you might see a 300% variation in that exact soil. So managing the chemistry in your facility for ultimate yields, you have got to do that. And where we started to get down that rabbit hole was when we started effectively using the track and trace data that was mandatory by regulated facilities. In the early years of regulated cannabis, there's all this new track and trace, and most people groaned, complained, bitched about it. We were fortunate to work with some very forward-thinking cultivators in the earlier years, and we all had the same mentality, us as advisors and them as cultivators, that if we're going to be forced to take this data, we have got to do something with it. And one of the things that I requested when I got access to this track and trace data was I asked for we call it a heat map, but essentially you do a two-dimensional top-down view of your soil beds or pots or facility or whatever it is, and then you can overlay that track and trace data, and we can get a per plant yield, and we can get a per 4x4 yield, and then we color code it. A lot of times, that 30% in yield that you need to maintain to hit those targets of financial profitability are because of one or two dysfunctional spots within your cultivation space. And if you're not managing and looking at the Malic 3 test, you're not going to identify those because the saturated paste test will reveal fairly consistent data and it will be chalked up as the same. It's not though. So if you're not doing any soil testing, you got to get on one of those paths. At least get with one of the people that's doing the saturated paste. That will improve it. I feel you're still always going to be chasing yield, and you should really get with someone that's doing the Malic 3. And the dudes that are doing the saturated paste really should get on the Malic 3. Check out the class maybe. So yeah, it's really important. But when we did these heat maps, it would reveal visually red pockets, and we would say, holy shit, in this corner it is bright red. The yields are well below the needs. What is wrong with this bed? When we go to analyze the soil chemistry in that bed, it's usually extremely dysfunctional. So a lot of times getting up to that peak yield is simply balancing the soil that you already have with itself. So if you have 30 pots in a room, if you got 4 beds in a room, if you got 400 acres, whatever it is, there's going to be variation from corner to corner. And you need to find a way to identify that variation and then correct that variation. Obviously, if you're a small home grower, you're not going to have track and trace data. You should be trying to figure out how to get a per plant yield. Even if you do it wet, you can do a wet weight and you can at least compare those wet weights. Typically, the plants will dry down fairly consistently. So if you get a pre-cure wet weight as you're harvesting, that, in my opinion, is one of the most valuable things you can ever do to investigate what's wrong with your facility. So I would agree with this. I do not agree with the Solomon strategy. I think it was somewhat helpful to the progress of mineral chemistry, but the Solomon sheets and the different strategies I have not seen that to actually work. So let's get to some of these questions here. There's a question about rock dust. So I think there's way too much emphasis on rock dust as filling the needs in your soil. It comes nowhere near the trace mineral. And Smiley is confirming that exactly right now. So Smiley's confirming that as well. Smiley has recently gotten into soil chemistry, and he's been seeing great success with that. So he's getting hyped up on what that can bring to his farm, and that's cool to see. What I see the best value of the rock dust is it adds diversity. So there's a tremendous amount of nutrient in there. Your plants need more than 13 elements to grow. We probably haven't even identified and named everything that a plant needs to grow. So I think the benefit of rock dust is that it adds complexity and diversity. I think there's a paramagnetic aspect there that undeniably works and provides value. I think some people chalk it up to woo-woo. That definitely works. So adding something that has paramagnetic properties does promote plant growth. I think where you see, so there's some advisors that advocate only putting rock dust into your soil. I don't think that's a good strategy. What they're doing with that is they're adding weight to that soil. So a part per million is a weight by weight calculation. So the weight of the minerals in the soil, the weight of the soil itself, and that comparison is what derives a part per million in grams and milligrams. So if you load your soil up with rock dust, you increase the weight of that soil. And it's honestly kind of hard to wrap your mind around, but essentially what it does is it makes your soil heavier so that anything you add to it is less impactful because it's going to take more element to raise that ship because it's heavier and it's a comparison. And so the people that are advocating heavy rock dust and nothing else are feeding low strength soluble salts. That's the part they don't tell you. And so by adding a lot of rock dust in that soil, you're adding weight and it buffers whatever top dress you do. And so when we've worked with farms that do very hefty rock dust applications into their soil, anything that they choose to do with a top dress is minimized because it has less of a dramatic impact on parts per million and concentration of nutrients in that soil, which is honestly kind of hard to wrap your mind around. But that's what's happening. So I think that's the best use of that. And so I there might be phosphorus in basalt rock. Again, you're not going to make any of the targets that you need to with just a rock dust. I think it adds weight, it adds complexity, it adds texture. If you get the chunky kind, that's a form of aeration, so that's all advantages, So I think that's good. So I think we answered that, where that fits into the process. I put it in, but I don't make it near as big as people try to rely on. I don't subscribe to that at all. So let's see here. So there's a couple questions. There was the one. There it is. Yep. Micro and macro elements are so important, 100%. And it does. There was another one in there about affecting the soil, which is very important.
Is it Josiah?
No, that's part 3. We're going to get back to
Okay.
that one. So this is a question about phosphorus solubility. This is a common question. This gets asked a lot. I think there's two things happening here. One, we have we have targets and desires and ideals and a narrative coming from various advisors in the industry that are coming from a university salt-based mindset where you have to hit certain targets. So the targets that we hit on the saturated paste test are much lower than what other advisors would be advising that are coming from what I would describe as a chemical-based mindset. And you don't need 3 parts per million on the saturated paste test if you have adequate biology.
Right.
If you throw in heterorhabditis nematodes, that a nematode's function is cycling nitrogen and phosphorus, you can have great results with less than 1 part per million of phosphorus. So I think
in his context, it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
If you don't have biology, that's that context.
Yeah, exactly. And everybody can take their own strategy. I don't agree with a lot of them, but you can supplement with the organic salive powders. That is something that we do. But getting that biological activity up very high will cycle that phosphorus that's there faster. Phosphorus can be reused. It goes up and down the plant. Obviously you need some. The obstacle that we run into with phosphorus is I refuse to use guanos. And so you're very limited in what you're able to use. You're down to, soft rock phosphate, fishbone. Those all have their own obstacles and limitations. So if you continue to cram the fishbone, you're going to run into a sodium issue. if you're relying only on CalPhos, you're probably not going to get the phosphorus you need. And so that kind of comes back to the context and components of the system. So if you don't have enough biology, then yeah, you need to get 3 parts per million of phosphorus. Yeah. So yeah, genetics definitely do help yield, for sure. For sure, they do.
And microbes help genetics.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just going to catch up on so sulfates is one strategy. I don't like to use a lot of sulfates. It can help. It's a good way to get isolates. But I do feel when you compare the living soil flour, the sulfates are quite harsh. So we use them in certain situations. The only times I would personally use sulfates is I do use potassium sulfate periodically. The only time that I use potassium sulfate over potassium silicate is if there's a major need to overcome sulfur and I don't need gypsum. So that would be a way to get your sulfur, but then you also have to have potassium. The other time I would use potassium sulfate is when there's a tremendous potassium need that needs to be maintained. And if you're going to make a big jump in any one element, it's best to split it up. So sulfates are easily taken up, but in my opinion, it's the only thing people are using that adds an undesirable flavor in the living soil. So I don't use those very much. And we do use amino acid chelates. That's what I do. So, so just trying to catch up. But then, so I guess we could jump to the third component, which the third component that is impacting everybody's yield is your choice and your approach to managing pests, without a doubt.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And like I said, everything you do affects the microbes. Yep. And any IPM spray is likely going to affect them as well, and typically in a very negative fashion. So
yeah, and I made a post back in 2017. I'll forever be the villain, but Neem is literally the most antimicrobial shit you can put on your. It's crazy. If you have a microscope, I encourage you to experiment with it. But during the Neem popularity and evolution of the device, we'll say, the original advice was doing a Neem tea, which you do, I think it was 1 or 2 tablespoons Neem cake, 1 or 2 tablespoons kelp meal per gallon, and you bubble it. Neem cake is a high nitrogen material. High nitrogen materials are going to have bacteria and their predator on it, so you can get some organisms on there, which is kind of interesting. Even though the azadirachtin is remarkably antimicrobial, certain organisms do figure out how to live on that stuff. And you can do what Elaine describes as a protozoan infusion doing that, and that's what people were doing. So it can have biology on it, but when you spray neem oil, we've done so many measurements of that, your head would spin. But we've had a farm that had 2 greenhouses. They sprayed one with neem. They didn't spray the other one. There's like a 28% difference in yield. And it was like an 84% reduction in all biology with one light, moderate, reasonable spray of neem. So it's insanely antimicrobial. Doesn't mean it's not a good product. It's just you need to factor that in. So most people are obsessively spraying it. You are removing yield and potential every time you spray it.
Well, and it's a mindset thing. Like, are you managing your pests with knockdowns because we don't know how to manage it through nutrition? It's preventative versus after the fact. So it's just a different mindset of how to go about doing it, and it does take learning a different way to do it. So if you have to do a knockback, it's not that Neem is awful. It's just that you just need to understand that it is going to seriously negatively affect the microbes in the soil, and you have to do something about that if you want to get actually out of the situation of having more and more pests.
Which is the mindset change, which maybe bullet point 4 is mindset.
Yeah.
You're never going to win in living soil if you're taking a battling, warmongering mindset,
Right.
And you can't just go in there and bomb shit to death and expect it to be living soil. It just doesn't work. So here's a question about
symptomatic farming.
Symptomatic
farming, and we've been doing it for a long time, and we've been convinced that we're going to get these bugs. It's just normal. Well, it's not normal. It's common, but it's not normal. And, that's been just get this and have this whole plethora of all these things that kill things. And, and we just need to shift to just even having the concept that it's actually possible to raise a healthy crop that's not going to get taken out by pests. Like that needs to get into our mindset that it's actually possible.
Yeah. And the main obstacle in our consulting work of people hitting the peak potential of what we've already proven is possible is the belief that you can do this without multiple IPMs. About once or twice a year, we have a farm that it's almost impossible to help. We just had one recently where they're just obsessively going to spray IPM products 3 times a week. We can't help those farms. You're never going to get...
We'll just never be able to get establishment of the organisms. They'll never then see the result that then drives the new change in behavior.
Yeah.
You have to have some sort of level of faith in the intelligence of nature. You really do. And be willing to, and you may, if you're a farm that's at that level, you may not be able to afford that, or at least think that you can't afford that leap in faith, because it's just not in your mindset that that's possible yet. You want to believe, but can you really make the leap? And those of us that are making the leap will change the future and be, set that new 4-minute mile. And that's what this is really about, is changing that 4-minute mile, putting a new stake in the ground of what's actually possible. Yeah,
totally. So there's a question here about soap as a pesticide. So I think what he's talking about is sometimes it's called potassium fatty acid soap, something along that line. There's a KNF or JDAM treatment that does this. They call it JWA, which it uses, I think it's potassium hydroxide, canola oil, and at least 27 pesticides.
Well, I mean, so hold up. Now, this is important, because we have to understand that pesticides don't just come from us spraying them on. They come from us thinking that we're doing good in making these products to help bees or help make this ferment that's supposed to be natural. We have to understand what's happening in the food system, and that those pesticides are loaded in most every product. It's in 70% of the water now, in the rainwater. So it's everywhere. And if you really want to eliminate and do your job to eliminate pesticides, whether you're actively spraying them or inheriting them from something you fermented, we have to wise up to that. And literally for our survival. So we need to do that. And we're just getting into bees, and that's why I mentioned bees. But, we've just noticed that even in the bee community, when they're trying to feed their bees sugar and things like that, and corn syrup, these things are loaded with pesticides. And then they, I don't know. It just food for thought. When we we have good intentions, but we need to make sure that those intentions actually check out in the end. We're at a critical moment in history where we have to be diligent. We have to wise up to where things are, not to be negative about things, but to be wise and intelligent and navigate through this and actually make it out of this, craziness that we've put ourselves in. So
Native Americans have had this 7-generation thing. We're on number 7, and there's not a lot of hope for anything after this. And not to get too heavy during a weed conversation, but it seems that the only people that are legitimately making moves towards that goal are oftentimes cannabis growers. And that's why we put so much effort into cannabis. And not to put the pressure on y'all, but food farmers ain't saving us. They're not. The most forward-thinking, progressive farmers on the planet right now are living soil cannabis cultivators, in my opinion.
Well, there are some that are definitely trying.
I'm not saying they're not trying. I'm just saying the leaders are definitely in this pack. That's all I'm saying. But to get back to the question, so there's a question about potassium soap as a pesticide. In my opinion, this is one of the worst things you can decide to use. It might have a great suffocation contact kill. It doesn't have a nasty chemical in it, unless you're doing the JDAM one. It's loaded with pesticides. But even if you buy a commercially produced potassium soap or potassium fatty acid product, sure, it does have a contact killing, but in every situation, a farm we've worked with cannabis, that increases the pests. When even though it has a contact kill. Just because it has a contact kill doesn't mean it's not exacerbating the problem. So when we analyze those products and we send them into our lab to see what they're like nutritionally, a reasonable solution strength of the potassium soap products are more parts per million of potassium than I would apply to the root zone in a hydroponic situation. So there's a lot of context. Like, okay, it might have contact kill, but you're given 250 parts per million of potassium. That's enough to make bugs as a root applied soil product, or a soil applied nutritional product rather. So to me, numerically, that's a garbage product. Even if it does have contact kill, one of the last choices I'm ever going to choose. There's a popularity to do a JWA, and we do analyze those as well, and that would be the absolute last product I would ever consider for a pesticide application, because most people are using canola oil, which is literally the most toxic plant on the planet. It has the most glyphosate, it has the most pesticide. Literally the worst choice you could ever do is spray canola oil on your cannabis plant. We've had several regulated cannabis facilities that failed for multiple pesticides that were inherited in the manufacturing of the JWA. I think it's one of the things that Korean natural farming and that whole camp is the most incorrect on, and I will stand by that. I do have some here that are horribly contaminated, but I'm trying not to swat the bee's nest too much by posting results of contaminated JWA. But just take my word for it. It's a literal truck stop bathroom of garbage.
But there's like the 2 points on that are we just have to, whether or not we are a fan of fermenting, home fermenting or not, we need to do our due diligence as a co-creator with nature in the garden, right? We are the protector, we are the provider in the garden for these things. You need to do a job as a human in the garden to make sure that these pesticides are not getting in there if that is your intention. And it can't sneak in through the back door like that as well, so make sure you're aware of where these pesticides are coming from. And if you're going to ferment something, make sure that it's either something you're growing and you know that it's not in there, but keep in mind there's lots of pesticides everywhere. And then 2, this is back to that symptomatic farming again, right? So an excess in something is going to cause a deficiency in something else.
There you go.
And that is just the way that it is, and that is how pests show up, is this imbalance that's creating a need for nature to take it out. Nature is just doing its job. It is just telling you that there's something wrong, and that's it. All you need to do is go, well, I'm off balance somewhere. What am I off balance? Sure, do a knockback with whatever is appropriate that you see fit as appropriate, but understand what that knockback will bring, understand how that knockback will affect your soil, understand that knockback is not something you should rely on. You shouldn't rely on the Prozac. You need to fix the problem. You know what I mean? Yeah. You need to fix the nutritional deficit or imbalance wherever that is.
Right. And if you rely on SSRIs for managing your mind, carry on.
Yeah, do whatever you need to do, but you get the idea. Symptomatic farming, symptomatic medicine.
Yeah. And
somebody was saying.
And I think the real important point that you said is with the potassium soaps, you're creating another problem by cramming in so much potassium. In the case of the JWA, I think the heart is in the right place and that we're trying to change agriculture, but you cannot change the future of agriculture relying on a broken agricultural system.
Right.
And you cannot take the God's awful worst agricultural, most contaminated GMO glyphosate bullshit product on the planet, condense it down canola oil, and condense it down and call it an organic pesticide. In every situation we've looked, there's several pesticides, maybe on up to 10 or 12 pesticides in that product. Yeah. Nobody in KNF knows that because nobody wants to spend any money on testing or believe in any sort of reasonable scientific research of their product.
But to not beat up on KNF, there are actual organic products that are listed on the Oregon, what is it? Oregon?
Go to ODA.
Yeah, go to ODA, and there are organic products that get certified that test hot for pesticides. We are just shitting so much in our pond that they're literally everywhere. And, sometimes this little inert ingredients, 1%, less than 1%, can be a way to offload things. So
Careful.
It's just boop.
You get run off the road for saying that shit. But next topic. All right. So, but go to the Oregon Department of Agriculture
Yeah.
and look into the pesticide advisories. The easiest way to find it is to type into the internet search machine Oregon Department of Agriculture pesticide advisory, and you navigate through the cannabis, and they have a list. They were doing it like once or twice a month, and it kind of came to a halt, probably for the same reasons why I cut off the wife. There's a lot of very violent people that don't want you to know this shit. But nonetheless, even in organically approved, it's another reason why I don't like neem oil. Go look on the ODA. Maybe we'll make a whole episode about it. The last 7 products they did were OMRI approved neem oil products that had somewhere between 6 and 12 pesticides in them. So,
But I mean, I bring this up because, even in the medical world or human world where we think we're eating good, we think we're eating healthy, when we really have no idea what is happening, and we don't understand where these things that are not that should be healthy for us, where they are really hindering us and hurting us.
Yeah.
We live in a pretty toxic world, and I don't mean to sound pessimistic, but we have to arm ourselves and we have to take care of ourselves and detoxify more than we ever have needed to in the past. Yeah. And I just think that we need to understand these things without getting dark, doom and gloomy, but just, do your due diligence and take care of things the way that needs to be taken care of. And yeah.
So we're getting close to the hour. I'm about to wrap it up. I do want to show a couple photos of a project that Sarah spearheaded. Obviously, when Sarah and I got together, I had all of the cannabis experience. So it's been a slow evolution of bringing her up to the speed of knowledge that I had in cannabis. And then around 2018, we started putting her as the front runner on some of our major projects. And one of the ones I'm most proud of is one I'm going to show you a couple photos. We're working on getting a full case study to put up, but it's a very complicated matter. So right now I'm just going to show you a couple photos. But nonetheless, this is one photo. So this is our control. Do you want to...
Yeah, this is the control. We had a couple different areas of testing and field trials that we were doing. This one is the control, so there's been no biology applied, no real earthworks.
No earthwork, yeah.
Yeah, and no mineral chemistry at all in this plot.
So we just dug a hole, the cultivators dug a hole, threw the plants in. They got the same nutrition, so they got the same feeds, they got the same foliar feeds, they got the same IPM, but they did not get any of the deep ripping, deep extract application, or follow-up extract applications. And this was what we would define as the control. And
okay, and so then this is the trial that we did where this particular field did get the deep ripping and it did get the deep extracts with follow-up extracts. Same nutrition, same foliar application, same IPM management. The difference was the biology and also this one was started, the other one was started from seed as well, right?
They were all seeds, yeah.
They were all seeds. So that was the same. This particular, it was a 4-acre field. This 1 acre actually had a little bit of compost applied to it the previous season. So it had, on the Logan test, it had 3.5% organic matter versus 1.5% in the other fields. Yeah. So that was a difference in this particular field. And we did see that shake out in the biology, in the biological establishment, especially in long term. This particular farm was in I don't remember what valley it's in, but in Maricopa Valley. Okay. And it had, the well water was atrocious. It had 2,400 parts per million totality of both sodium and sulfur in the water.
It had a shitload of nutrient.
It had a shitload of nutrient, but we were dealing with very high sulfur and salts. And so we weren't sure if we would even be able to establish our organisms given that level of salt. So we had to do some finagling on how we fed them and things like that. But we were able to actually get the establishment of organisms over time, and we do, hopefully we'll be able to show you that data.
Yeah.
But we got 4,000 pounds on this 1 acre.
Yeah. The front acre and a half. So this was a 4-acre total property, and the front acre and a half got the full treatment, the full Monty, and it hit 4,000 pounds of jarable flower per acre. The back acres had less organic matter, so they got the full treatment but less organic matter percentage.
Right.
They still hit well into the 3,000 pounds per acre. This section, the control, if we were to extrapolate that, it'd probably be actually under 1,000 pounds per acre. The other acres up here on the hillside, they got biology, but not deep ripping. We're all above 1,000 pounds per acre. And this was 2018 we did this one?
2018, and they even planted, or 2018, 2019, one of those years, and they even planted late.
I think it's 2018.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, during that time period in our consulting, most farms that we work with were aiming for 1,500 to 2,000 pounds per acre as their metric for doing a great job. This one hit 4,000 pounds of jarable flower. It all had 26 to 28% THC. So fantastic genetics here. You also have to give it up to the cultivators as well.
Yeah.
The 2 cultivators that ran that project had gone through the Soil Food Web School, and we had worked in their personal gardens for one of the guys for 1 year, the other guy 2 or 3 years. So they had a great running start into it. There was no convincing of the cultivation crew of what was needed to pull this off. I find that that's most of the issue. Most of the issue is getting the farmer on board with what actually has to go down,
Right.
to be able to reach those yields.
And this was with not even actually being able to execute the entire plan, too.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so
That is a
I
good
feel like
point.
we knocked it out of the park.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it was, and mostly Sarah. I was really burnt out during that time period, so I put Sarah in charge of that one. I was starting to get overwhelmed with work, and super proud of what she did there, and the cultivators as well. So we have a case study. It's just very dynamic, ever sharing a case study with the world, but absolutely murdered it at that property. So we'll probably get to some questions that we kind of missed over on the way. There it was. Soil chemistry can be used
totally.
totally.
To promote better soil structure,
Yeah.
to benefit biology.
Yep.
Yep.
So correcting Cal-Mag ratios allows oxygen and flocculation. Definitely leads to better biological establishment, which we touched on in the beginning. Here's a question about, should we supply every element above and beyond a Logan report for the biology to consume? I think there's a minimum number of food resources that's important, but I don't think you need to be maxed out to get good biological establishment. I think you need good balance, and then you need food resources. So the real secret and the example we talked about was other things we added to the soil that are supportive to biology as well. So yes, I will recommend Logan Labs until something happens that leads me otherwise. The main reason why I use Logan Labs, well, the first reason is they do the tests that provide the most value to the farmer. I've seen lots and lots of soil tests. I've tried to work through other types of soil tests to see how they can benefit the farmer. Most of them benefit making it easier to sell fertilizers. So there's something like 600 or 800 different soil test procedures. There's like 6 that are mainly used. Most of those sell NPK fertilizers. I do believe that the Malic 3 test actually provides the most consistent, reliable, actionable data to the farmer that you can calculate and see a appropriate response. If you do the math and you do those amendment applications, the follow-up test is right in line with what you'd expect. So the data is reliable, it's consistent, and then the numbers are calculatable and predictable. It's not working on hunches or expected release rates of solubility. I don't buy into any of that stuff. The other reason why I back Logan Labs is, in years prior, if you didn't speak like a farmer, they could sniff you out. Any lab could sniff you out as a cannabis farmer. And a lot of times they'd hang up the phone. They'd either not work with you or they'd straight up hang up the phone. Logan Labs talked to us like we were adults and we were farmers well before this shit was legal. And I do have a loyalty to the people that were there in the beginning. And Logan has been great in that respect. Every now and then there is an issue with data. Usually it's during the absolute peak of the week when everybody's burnt out, but it's just like getting your taxes done on midnight on April 14th. You're probably going to have an error. And so we don't send it in at the exact peak. And but on the other side of that, Logan will maintain your soil for a 2-week period. And if you feel that anything's wrong with that data or you need to rerun a test, they will do it for free. That is a tremendous value that a lab can provide. So if you do think that there's an error, you just call them up, ask them to rerun it. They have never told me no or given me lip or gotten sassy. They just do it. They ask why. They ask what I'm looking for as a different value. And I think because of the rapport and relationship I have with the lab directors and the women that answer the phone, they never, there's never a problem. And they usually do it that day. A lot of times if there's a reason to then do the AA 8.2 test, but we don't want to always pay for it. I don't think you should always pay for it. I think you should only use it in certain situations. So if you send them enough soil to do 2 rounds of tests, so if you give them 2 cups of soil or a full sandwich baggie, and the data comes back and you feel that you could benefit from another type of test, they will do that for sure. Obviously, there's going to be a charge for that. I enjoy your perspective as well. Thank you for enjoying.
We're just glad you're here and somebody's listening.
Yeah, we're just glad that somebody is here finding value. If you're not here on this show, you can usually catch what I said on other shows by other people repeating it, but we appreciate you coming to the real source. Phil Callahan and all his books are very interesting. Very interesting. And a lot of his research is not allowed to be viewed by the public because it was done by the military. So, I don't know. Joe Salatin is a great example. Joe Salatin's having a workshop in Virginia in when?
The end of June.
The end of June. I don't think we're going to be able to make it. We bought tickets, but I don't know we're actually going to be able to go. But Joe Salatin is having a workshop.
That one's more of a medical, like a wellness workshop. He's got another farming one that's in like August or July or something like that. That's a farming one. Yeah.
Let's see. Should I be getting more than 65 pounds for 12 75-foot beds? Well, so I would break that into square footage. It sounds like that's a greenhouse. Please chime in the comments if that is a greenhouse and just explain the rough square footage of those greenhouses. If there's 12 75-foot beds, I would think that's got to be close to 5,000 square feet of cultivation space because, 35, it's probably a 3,500 square foot greenhouse.
Hold please. We need to do some math.
Hold please. We need to do some math. Someone's really far away. Typically, we see in a greenhouse, and please chime in if you're still around, a little more context, but typically how I calculate yields in a greenhouse situation is by the square foot of the space. I don't remove for canopy. I don't remove for aisleways. That gets way too dynamic. So we've translated all our numbers to how big is that space. So if it's a greenhouse and it's 1,000 square feet, typically we rarely yield under 50 pounds per 1,000 square feet with new clients or people that have never... we've only had 1 or 2 people hit below 50 pounds of drawable flower per 1,000 square feet, and there was other issues involved there. But typically, 50 pounds per 1,000 square feet is a very easy target to hit. Usually by the second harvest, people are 65 pounds per 1,000 square feet or more. I would think that this sounds like roughly, somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 square feet of greenhouse space. And in that case, yeah, you should be doubling that. Greenhouse. 18 by 80 with 2 beds. Let's see. 18 times 80. So it's 1,440 square feet.
David.
Yeah, there you go.
227 pounds for 3,500 square feet.
Yeah, so but we're actually 18 by 80 is 1,440 square feet. So that's 1.44 times 50. You should be at 72 pounds jarable flower on the low end. 94 pounds is definitely possible. And our highest yielding clients get like 80 pounds, 70 to 80 pounds per 1,000 square feet, which would be 117 pounds. So yeah, I think almost double is possible. And in order to reach that number, you got to balance soil chemistry, but most importantly, at that size of square footage, I guarantee it, there's going to be a variability in soil chemistry. So you need to dissect that facility in a way that reveals the variation. So oftentimes it's visually apparent to you, like there's a corner that's yellowing or lower yielding or visibly smaller. I would start there. We usually let the variation reveal itself before we just start doing a million soil tests. at that large of a facility with, it would be valuable to test individual beds. I think at that size and scale, the $68 in tests will be gotten back in yield. If you're in a 4x4 tent, or rather a 4-light doing 5 tests, might not make sense, but I would probably test every single one of those beds and then bring them up to each other, because they're 100% of the time, there's soil balancing errors that lead to variability in the soil chemistry of that soil. And there's at least 30% yield in your facility simply due to the variation from corner to corner. Back when I started in 2013, I used to work out of a place called Maker Place in San Diego, and I used to build tea brewers and do all kinds of crazy experiments. And the guys that made Green Bros started at the same place, and it's pretty cool. We did it all at the same time, and it's pretty cool to see their machine at our facilities. Like, we both started with ideas at this little like shop in San Diego, and we're still up at the top. It's pretty cool. But yeah, join the classes. I agree. You should enroll in the classes. So the soil balancing class will teach you how to get the soil chemistry on point. And then the Crescent Method basic training is essentially our consulting work. Sarah's taken all the contents that we provide with a one-on-one consulting relationship, and we've distilled it into a class, which I think is going great. I think Sarah did a great job on it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's important to know why you're doing something. We just have to understand why it is that we're doing something and what the important components of this particular method are, and why are we doing it. I just find that it's easier to just teach you, break it down to each and every component, so then you can troubleshoot and you can go, okay, this is why I'm doing it. This is why this component's important. It all fits together. And that's the thing with when you're working with nature and you're to this level that we are with these microbes and these minerals, is they're all working together. It's really, you can't dissect it into one part is really more important than another. Everything works together, and the sum is greater than its parts, for sure. Mm-hmm. So.
And you don't need a microscope to be in the classes. Obviously, the microscope class, you need a microscope, but that's why we do these classes, because Sarah does the microscope assessment for you.
Yeah, it does come with the bioassays.
It does come with the assessment.
You have to be able, in the class, you have to be able to submit that bioassay and be able to see with your own eyes what you're doing in the grove and what the microbes are also telling you as well. It helps us with adjusting watering. It helps us with making all kinds of decisions in the field, what they tell us. So that's why we do the microscope work with it. It's just retraining you on how to read your labs that are pertinent to this system.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can't disregard that. So just to recap the evening, you have got to get biology on point. Yeah. You need to inoculate with soil food web organisms, maintain an environment that encourages their proliferation and establishment. These things have a life cycle. It's 10 to 20 minutes sometimes. If you're spraying some shit once a week, you're not getting to forest systems. You have got to manage soil chemistry. I advocate focusing on the Mehlich 3 test, managing the saturated paste test with your decisions in mineral amendment choices, as well as putting the biology in. In every single situation where I've worked with a farm long-term, managing soil chemistry, focusing on the Mehlich 3, getting good biology, the saturated paste test falls into line. So I've yet to see that not be the case.
And if soil balancing isn't something that you want to bite off on right now, you certainly don't have to. That can come later if you want to, or not. It's just up to you and what you think your bandwidth is. If you're actively growing, you may not have the bandwidth to do that just yet, and that's fine. In the basic training, though, we'll walk you through all that stuff and getting all the labs that you need to, and knowing what's going on and making the corrections. So yeah.
I think if you're already a soil food web graduate, I think you're in a better position to understand what the goal is, biologically speaking. In our training, we tell you the functional applications of it. I adore Dr. Elaine like an aunt or something, but we've had to really kind of mold and shape her advice into more functional applications for the cultivation space. And so I do take a lot of pride in that as our contribution to agriculture. And so in that case, you could probably do really well with just the mineral chemistry class. It starts, when does it start? June 2nd. So the mineral chemistry class starts June 2nd. And for that, we meet and we talk about it. We go over live examples. I provide you with a calculator tool, and then you get to join our forum where we discuss these. Some of the members of the forum have been doing a fantastic job doing study groups, and they're meeting about once a week and working together as a small community, which is absolutely amazing, which was what we wanted in the beginning. So shout out to OG Lover and Godai and Aaron and all the other dudes that are showing up and making it a fantastic group learning experience. David King as well is in this class, kicking ass, not playing around in the Mendo area. So if you're in the Mendo area, you want an old school dude to whoop your ass into shape, hit up David King. Yeah, and here's the deal. People don't understand. You're literally, I'm not saying don't use those products. I'm not shitting on any of the products. Just you have to know it's more dynamic than just sprinkling on it 2 tablespoons. We have farmers pretty regularly that are literally addicted to those top dresses. They don't understand how it affects soil chemistry and ultimately destroys your soil. So
more is not necessarily better.
No.
We're after a specific balance
Yeah.
to achieve that health we're talking about. So
Yeah. And then I guess the third bullet point is you're never going to increase yields with IPM products and spraying poison. Your plant does not take a biocontrol product and turn it into yield. It does not take neem oil and turn it into terps. Well, I guess neem terps. But it's not taking those components and turning it into output. Right. You are giving your plant diarrhea, you are building them up with toxicity, and they are using very energy-intensive processes to detoxify themselves, which is what reveals itself as variegation, and people ooh and ah and call it colors of cannabis. When you do that on Instagram, you're literally just telling people that you're spraying toxic shit on your plants. So don't do that. Choose nutrition. Don't spray prophylactic, constant IPM products. It's not good, man. It's not good.
I think a lot of us are wanting to choose nutrition, and we think we are, but that's what we're trying to get at is that an excess in something can cause a deficit in something else, and so it's really about a balance of nutrition, and that's what brings about health. Yeah. It's not the excess, not like oodles and more on. It's understanding what needs to be there and at what balance. Yeah.
You got to know why. This is something we keep saying. You got to know why you're doing something. Yeah. Do a soil chemistry test to know where you're at. Know what needs to be corrected. Most often, you don't need more of the top dress. You need appropriate levels of calcium to what you've already top dressed. You need appropriate levels of trace minerals to what mineral nutrition is there. If you have 1 million parts per million of calcium in your soil, if you don't have adequate boron, it doesn't matter. And if there's all these relationships. So get your soil test. Reach out if you have a question about what soil tests to get. If you want to jump in the soil class, we've talked about that a few times. And if not, just keep tuning in. We'll keep getting deeper. We just moved. We finally gotten settled. We're about half-ass unpacked, and I feel like I'm a normal human again. We will start producing other videos and educational stuff. Yeah. We've just been trying to maintain the live schedule and feel like humans again after a major cross-country move. And so stay tuned.
And for you, those of you that actually do grow vegetables, I'll be bringing on some people to talk about what they do in their yards and in their gardens. And probably somebody we've actually had on a podcast before. It's a little follow-up, but her name is Courtney, and she's a just all-around badass human being doing a fantastic job on a little postage stamp in Southern California. So, yeah.
Yeah, man.
So look forward to that, and I guess we'll catch you next time. Thank you so much. Much love to all of you.